All right.
You're listening to the episode of Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. This is a place where you're entitled to Brad's opinion. And now for your host, Brad Allard.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? Well, today you're not just going to be entitled to my opinion, but entitled to the Councilman Jimmy Stanford's opinion. And I'm not sure our opinions are going to line up, but who cares? We're going to have a good, productive, constructive discussion about a couple of the issues that are facing our community. And we know who they are, what they are rather, the SRO issue, and we're going to talk about also the tone of what's gone on in Burleson politics the last couple of years and the concerns we both have about that. We're going to also talk about a little bit of his background as well, but how it relates to the SRO conversation. I have a feeling that's going to be the most asked about, because I asked for questions, and that's where I got most of my questions from.
Fair enough.
Related to school security, SROs, Burleson's role, et cetera, et cetera. As far as the sponsors, y'all know who they are. I'd rather use the time to have our discussion because it's going to take time, and I like to have that time. But I thank the sponsors for making this possible. They are all very encouraging about this, very supportive, and they're glad to see this happen. But this is the first time Mr. Stanford's been on the show, and I'm sure he'll find this hopefully to be a good experience. All right. Oh, quiet down. Well, see, that's what I'm talking about. The joke is I can't seem to understand.
335. We still do it.
Okay. This is show 335. Yes, we've been doing it for a while. Yes, this one more. Boom. Okay, we're good. All right. Like I said, the comments have been turned off because I didn't want to get distracted and have to read off the screen and all this, and also have comments that were either unproductive or not part of the conversation. So I have questions, though, many of y'all asked. So let's start off. Mr. Stanford, you were elected in June of 2021, correct?
Yes, sir. Correct.
What have you learned since that election about being a member of the council?
Well, it's been a very positive experience. It really has. We've been able to accomplish a lot of good things in our city. The dog park, we've gotten that opened up. We've got alley cats coming. So it's been a good experience as far as getting things going and working together and getting things for our community. Well,
maybe at the end of the show, if we have time, we could talk about some of those good things because we all could use to hear them, certainly. It's been a hot summer more ways than one, to say the least.
Yes, it has.
Now, you're a former Fort Worth police officer, correct?
Yes, sir.
How long did you serve?
A little over 28 years.
28 years. That's roughly how long I taught in BHS, or BISD, rather. One of the concerns that comes up quite often from at least people who contacted me about the SROs is that the schools are going to be guarded or protected, or a phrase you want to use, by people with less training than maybe a standard police officer. That's a real concern. Is that a concern of yours?
No, it's not, and I'm going to tell you why. Mm-hmm. It's because if a school hires the security at all, even if they call it private security, state law mandates that be a licensed peace officer.
Okay.
So there's not going to be a lesser. It's not going to be that they're running down to the mall and recruiting mall cops. It's
okay.
I've heard that term, and no, that's not what it is. You have to be a licensed peace officer.
Is this a new opinion for you? Because at the meeting 4 weeks ago, you said that they didn't necessarily have to be a fully commissioned police officer.
Well, my reference there was talking about that we don't have to utilize the Burleson police. Understand this. Understand that whenever the police department, whichever police department it is, whenever they fulfill any position that's grant funded or that's paid for by another group, they have to pull that out of their current reserves. So, for example, we've approved the 3, which it's 50% increase in SROs, but to do that, they're going to have to pull those 3 off the street, and now we got to backfill. So that's always a concern. Is that okay? Well, if we take them off the street, how many can we take off the street without jeopardizing that part of the safety to put into this other environment, whether it's schools, whether it's a drug program, a task force with the FBI, whatever that case may be? How do we manage that?
Well, I guess that's why a lot of people are confused when you made this statement. They didn't have to be a fully commissioned peace officer. You're saying that they do now. You understand that to be the case now, or was it just a statement that was made 4 weeks ago in the heat of the conversation or whatever else? Because the implication very strongly taken was that it could have been anybody basically that has a concealed carry license, and they could be hired to be security at a Burleson school. And
if that's the message I gave out, then I apologize. I obviously misstated or didn't communicate that correctly.
Well, Well, thank you for that. But that really did set off a lot of alarms. And there's other aspects of the SRO that we really support, not just the professional level of security that Cordell and his crew give us, but also the fact that that these gentlemen are role models, and these gentlemen have done a great deal more than just wear a badge on our campus. You know, Jack Goldman, Jerry Stringer, Mike Alley. Currently, we have Brad Schaefer at Centennial. These guys are much more than just security. They are people that students look up to and emulate and consider law enforcement careers because of them.
Exactly, and understand this: there was never, and you can go back. We can go back and watch the tape. There was never a discussion of getting rid of the SROs. There was concern of what we're going to do at the elementary school level, and we've got 10 schools. Now, only 9 of those are within Burleson city limits. So, what are we going to do at those schools? How are we going to prevent a Sandy Hook? How are we going to prevent a Uvalde at these elementary schools? We approved it, and there was never in my mind any discussion of canceling the SROs at the secondary. It was simply, what are we going to do at the elementary? How do we fix this? Because we don't have the resources to take an SRO program and apply it right now to the elementary schools.
Well,
so what can we do separately?
Well, I understand, and I don't think anybody was suggesting that we go from the 3 or 4 secondary ones and have a full-on force of SROs on all campuses, because we are aware of the expense. You know, the mayor made that pretty clear when he was on here last, that the expense would be pretty prohibitive at first. Now, on a side note, I suggested that when it's finally set up, the Biden administration signed that gun bill, which I had certain reservations about, but part of that was they have grants for school security. And I would hope that our city takes advantage of those grants when this program's up and running, because there's like $15 billion in grants available to buy equipment, to buy the stuff you need for expanding the SRO program. But I guess a lot of people, when they heard these comments, and they also heard your comments about, well, Joshua and Mansfield have their own police, TCU does, et cetera, and you were, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you were insinuating very strongly we should emulate their example. Is it your contention we should have Burleson ISD police or Burleson police in the schools?
What I like is what the school board brought up, and it's what I was trying to bring up that night, and whether it came across correctly or not. Some people understood what I was saying. I received a lot of positive feedback that said, hey, I like that proposal of what you're bringing up. And there were others that said, well, I took it this way. So here's the thing. I like what's being done now. I like what the school board brought up, that, hey, you know what, they listened to me. They heard, you know what, we need to do something at the elementary school level, and it needs to be in-house. I believe there needs to be a combination. I really do. Now, down the road, and again, this is a school district decision. I mean, they can pull the plug or they can do what they want to do. But I really like the fact of having a combination, because I mentioned earlier that there are 10 elementary schools, but only 9 in the city limits. Our authority stops at the city limit sign.
I'm unfamiliar which one is outside the city limits. Which elementary school?
I don't know that answer. I got that from the school board themselves.
Okay, I think it might be Stribling, where I live, because I live right outside the city limits, but I'm not sure. Somebody will tell me in the comments later.
And that came from the schools, from the school district themselves. They told me that there was one that was actually outside the city limits. So this is a there's pros and cons to everything. There's a ton of pros for the SROs, but there are some cons. So the cons are that we stop at the city limit sign. So if we could have a combination, which is what it looks like the BISD is going with, a combination, then we can actually go past the city limit signs, because then those individuals that work directly for the school district, they can travel. When our football team goes on the road, and maybe they're going to go play a state playoff game, and it's in a city and in a bad neighborhood, wouldn't it be nice to have a couple of licensed peace officers on that bus with them to go into that bad neighborhood? That's what can happen with this hybrid that's being introduced.
Well, it was my understanding that it happens already, but for certain trips. I mean, they wouldn't have Burleson PD go to, play a game here in Crowley, but if they were going to play one in some lesser neighborhood, shall we say, then it was my understanding there would be security on board. But it's been a while, so I'm not quite sure. The sight or the sounds that we heard from that meeting 4 weeks ago was you and Mr. Johnson had some very different views about having a citywide, or rather a district-wide police force. And I support Mr. Johnson's view on that, because I think Mansfield ISD may be able to support such a thing, but man, it'd be a massive expense and an upgrade for the taxpayers of this district. And the SRO program seems to work well. Now, in preparation for the show, to find out, make sure I have some of my facts straight, I talked to a board member and a member of the central administration that talked about these school security issues. And they asked not to quote them directly or even use their names because they're still in the formative process.
Exactly.
They're still talking. It's not going to be announced in the next board meeting Monday. It may be a little while before a final version, maybe in the fall. So they said, please don't say this is where we're going because we might not. But they both said they've been working on this even before Uvalde. Both of them were very clear that this is the subjects that were brought up by you and others on the council this month or July were already things in the works before any of this started with us and the council. That they've been, they had appointed Scott Shahay to be head of this part of the security team, and they've been working on this. And then about 3 or 4 weeks after they started, they had the Uvalde incident. So I'd like the listeners to know it wasn't like the school board wasn't doing anything, and then Uvalde happens, and they said, "Oh my stars, we better get off our tails and do something about it." They already were working on it.
Well, it sounds like we were on the same page then.
For the most part. And if the school board decides to adopt some of the ideas that you support, so be it. That's the nature of Democratic Republican politics. It's not something I'd be really excited about, but I'm not going to hold a grudge against the school board members if they vote in support of some of the ideas that you support. Because at the end of the day, it's a kid's security that worry about. And I can promise you, those school board members, Dr. Jimerson, Scott Shahay, fill in the blank, they think about school security a lot. And not just because of professional reasons, because they have kids or grandkids in the system. They want them protected. So
exactly. And at the end of the day, that's what we all want.
Right.
Is we want to make sure that every kid is protected at every school. From the city, if we decided to do all SROs, now we get the huge issue of where do we find them? And that's the hard part. The chief mentioned at the council meeting, he told us that, hey, I'm gonna have trouble even backfilling these 3 officers. We approved him a power shift before, and he hadn't been able to find the officers to fill that.
Well, part of that I understand. I've had Chief Cordell on before, and I'll probably have him again soon because this is such a big issue. But Burleson PD has pretty exacting standards. We don't hire, people just because they have maybe certification in their own gun, I guess, or whatever. I mean, Burleson PD, if to get hired by this PD is an achievement.
Yes.
And Cordell runs a great shop. I really respect how he runs his business. And so that may be the problem. And then the problem, we can't find willing bodies. We can't find bodies that we want supporting and protecting not just our kids, but this whole community. I talked to one of my sponsors, Shandy Stogsdill, is a real estate agent. She says The 2 things she talks about with her clients when they ask her about Burleson, it's always the schools and the crime rates, and the police protection. And because we have such good records on both, that's one reason why our homes are getting so expensive and property rates. I'm sure that's a topic for another day. But Fort Worth ISD uses this SRO program, and you came for them. And I'm just kind of curious why somebody from your background would support non-police officials in the schools.
So Fort Worth ISD uses it, and they also use the crime control tax. Now we're limited. You're limited in how much tax you can put on your sales tax, and they use the crime control tax, which helps support that. And it's been in place for a very long time. It's grown with the city, and I'm not saying that the SROs can't grow with the city and continue to be that route. But what I'm proposing, or what I proposed that day or suggested or even asked about, was what can we do in the meantime? If we did decide to go SROs, even at the elementary levels, I'm not sure the Fort Worth does SROs at the elementary level.
I just had several people make that. And I know one of your former colleagues who was an SRO. I went to church with him. And so that's how I got familiar with it. And I think he was at a junior high somewhere in the city.
Yeah. So that's where most of your SROs are at the secondary level. I believe that with Uvalde, with the whole, I mean, there's a lot of theories out there as far as what causes these things. A lot of it is attention seeking. I think it's people that know that I can get on Facebook, I can get a lot of support, and I can go do this stuff. And elementary schools are a softer target. we saw the SRO program. It's been around since 1953, long before I've been around.
Right.
But it's been around for a while, and it's evolved over time. It's evolved over time, and I think that it's important that things continue to evolve. We're going to have to find some way, I believe, to have some kind of coverage at the elementary schools. Having a fence or a single point of failure is just not it. I mean, once you breach a single point of failure, there's nothing to protect. In Uvalde, there was over 100 rounds fired into 2 classrooms and before the officers ever entered the building.
When I asked Mr. Cordell about SRO programs, I asked him, what's the first thing you ask of an SRO officer? And he said, the first question he asked is, are you going to take a bullet for these kids? Now, I'm not going to imply that a hired security force wouldn't have that kind of level of commitment, but I know Burleson Police has that level of commitment. And that's the level of commitment I would want. That's why I'm so much more in favor of Burleson Police. Now, I understand what you're saying about the expense. I understand what you're saying about taking cops off the streets.
So how let me ask you a question.
Sure, of course.
How would we make that happen at the elementary school level quickly?
Quickly not. And we don't want to do it quickly in a sense because we don't want to be in a situation where we're either shortchanging the equipment needed for this type of project, or we're hiring people that we don't think are up to our standards just to fill a body. Now, if the school board says it's a 5-year transition from, we'll have some security now, but we want at the end of this period of time, Burleson Police is part of the SRO program. That's maybe a good compromise if they want to extend that time. I don't expect anything that's going to come out of the school board or the city council to be resolved by Labor Day. It's going to take a lot longer than that. I've worked in government when I was down in school teaching. I was part of a government committee down in Austin, and nothing moves fast. And so if they said, okay, we can't afford to do it at every campus now, and because we can't, we're going to have this group. But at the end of the day, we're going to hire a couple every year. That's the way I would look at it. And as far as the expense, running a city is expensive. And I know you want to take care of the budget, but I don't know if this is the area in which we need to be looking at financial savings.
And this, for me, is not so much an expense. I know the mayor's mentioned it. Certainly, that's a discussion you'll have with him.
Sure.
It's not so much the expense as it is making sure that we have somebody there to protect the kids. And when I say quickly, I'm not saying cutting corners. I'm not saying go out here and just do a job fair and the first 10 to show up, we hire them. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is, how can we? You mentioned the high standards we have in our department, and,
right.
And the difficulty it gets in finding those people. Well, what do we do in the meantime? How do we ensure that there's not going to be an Uvalde or Sandy Hook here? And I don't have all the answers. I really don't. That's the reason I posed the question to the chief, and that's the reason I have these discussions.
I was going to ask you about that discussion about 4 weeks ago. It looked to a lot of us that Mr. Cordell was not aware that this was going to be the detail on which y'all are going to discuss it was going to be discussed. In other words, he did not have the time to prepare the kind of answers to answer your question. The city staff didn't have time to put their notes together, their data together, and it seemed like to me, and this is a frank observation, that Billy was ambushed a little bit by all this because he didn't know it was coming. And if he did, it's not the Billy Cordell I know, because I know Billy Cordell well enough by now to know how detailed oriented he is. And I surely know what kind of quality of staff we have that would have had him prepared. And he looked like in that meeting early July that he was not aware that this was going to be asked of him. That detail, anyway.
I don't necessarily agree with that, because I have a lot of respect for Billy Cordell. And here's the thing: at any time you're looking at a grant-funded position or a position that you don't have full control over in your budget, and he doesn't with the SROs. I mean, the school district could pull the SROs at any minute, and now he's got to figure out, well, what do I do with the officers and the equipment and the budget? Anytime you have that as a chief, you're always planning and strategizing. This was a proposal. This was actually an agenda item where he was coming to speak on the SRO. So I feel confident that he has had those discussions and he's looked at that. I don't think he wanted to step off into that because it is a school district thing, and he probably didn't want to step on toes. Especially like you mentioned, if there's already discussions going on to work, he probably didn't feel comfortable unveiling that. Now, I wasn't aware of any discussions. Nobody's relayed that. That's the reason I asked him if there's been any.
It just seemed like to me that knowing the way that school and city and state business is conducted in these meetings, that there's very specific things you can talk about in the agenda items. And it seemed like the conversation deviated into a more detailed philosophical financial discussion that maybe Mr. Cordell wasn't prepared for or couldn't be prepared for. And that's the impression people saw when they saw the live stream, whatever else, that maybe it would have been better if you'd have told him next meeting, 2 weeks from now, be prepared to answer these questions, or we're going to put it on the agenda. Because that way, us as citizens would have had time also to know that this was going to be discussed. We did not know that this was going to be discussed in this detail. It may be on the agenda item as such, but we didn't know that all of a sudden facts and figures and whatever would be coming out of nowhere, and people didn't have time to weigh in either through email or at the meetings themselves. A lot of the citizens felt like, where in the world is this coming from? And they didn't have a chance to either say yes or no. I'm sure you get emails and whatnot from supportive people of this idea, but they wouldn't have had a chance to say anything. I get the crew I run around with are a mixed bag, but most of them are like, we didn't have a chance. Are they going to have a chance now? How could they avail that chance to get their opinions known to the city council about all this?
Well, a lot of them did send emails and what have you, so I responded to all of those. And let me explain how I approach any agenda item when it comes in. And this is something I've done long before I even took council. For me, it's a 3-step process. First step, is it legal and ethical? Second step, is what is being proposed going to fulfill the needs? And the third step is the best allocation of resources. So obviously it's legal and ethical, but I wasn't sure that what was being proposed was going to fulfill the needs. I know we need 3 to take care of the secondary, but what about the elementary? So for me, it was the second question that I pose at every one of these that I look at and I said, well, that doesn't really, in my heart, fulfill the needs. So what can we do to fulfill those needs? What are we going to do about the elementary schools?
Well,
I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I understand, but this is a very, obviously a very sensitive issue for most people in Burleson since they have kids in the school, and we want to avoid at all costs an Uvalde situation. But again, to kind of go back, I understand your concerns on the immediate security of the elementaries, but I just think at the end of the day, the structure that we want is Burleson PD. Also, for another reason, is that they're under the jurisdiction and authority of Mr. Cordell and the citizens of this community. They're not a private security force, nor are they a BISD security force, which we may have less authority to deal with. Because, even if something happens on a school and involves an SRO, it doesn't matter if it happened on a school. Burleson Police has authority and jurisdiction.
Yes.
In Mansfield, what I've been told is they do have the authority to do certain things, but not a full officer's range of options. But they can make, citations and detainments and stuff like that. To be frank, I also heard that the Joshua ISD was not very responsive to the complaints of the people.
And make no bones about it, I'm not against SROs being at any level.
Okay.
I just want to know how to achieve safety for our kids.
I guess to finish this up, then, you don't advocate having Burleson ISD police like Mansfield. You'd rather have within our control as opposed to maybe a secondary force. The expense of that would be enormous. We're talking about expense. I mean, not so much as vehicles and whatever else. And there would be vehicles because Crowley ISD has vehicles. I see them drive by here. There's 3 schools within a mile of this studio, and I see Crowley ISD driving by all the time. So there would be vehicles, there would be radios, there would be, Kevlar vests and weapons and whatever else. That's a tremendous expense, And the thing about that expense, whatever we might save in the city budget would just be doubled on to the school budget, and it's basically the same taxpayers.
Yeah. So again, I go back to I've never really focused much on the expense on this. It's just trying to figure out what can we do. I strongly support Burleson doing this. My question again would go back to, because the school district boundaries don't line up with city boundaries. They don't. They're different sizes. So what do we do about the schools that are outside of the?
But if it's just one elementary, then maybe we can
currently,
we could pony up the money for that one elementary to a situation like you were describing for that one school, whether it be Stribling. I'm just guessing. I don't know all the boundaries, but Stribling, I think, is the furthest one out. Or maybe it might be Oak Grove, actually, come to think about it, over on 1187. But anyway, my point is that if we had to do a stopgap for that one school, then hey, let's do it. It's and we'll find the money.
It sounds like we're on the same page then, because that's what I've advocated all along, is that I really support the SROs,
All right.
but there's areas that we're not able to cover with our SROs. So what do we do for those areas? Because they're still our citizens. I mean, they're
Right.
still we've still got Burleson citizens sending their kids to these elementary schools or whatever school they decide to build in the future, because we're growing. And there's a good chance there's going to be more than just one elementary school outside our city limits.
Well, and I think we're talking about the same goal and
Yes.
maybe different avenues towards that goal. And I guess this is a good opportunity to kind of clarify some of the things that have been said. I understand. I have no doubt the security, the kids are your primary occupation with all of this. But I just like the fact that we had Burleson cops, and whether we can do that in September or not, or maybe September 2027, that would be my goal.
Yes.
But it is going to be expensive to somebody, and it also, and this may be an unfair characterization. It seemed like you were trying to save money for the city and drop that expense onto the schools. Is that not a proper characterization?
No. Whenever I mention any kind of cost savings, I was actually, and I probably should have clarified better, but I was thinking of, like you mentioned earlier, this is an expense that the school's going to pick up. So what can we do to maybe not have that level of expense? And that's the reason I mentioned that maybe if we do this at these elementary schools or what have you, we don't have to provide them vehicles because they'll be stationed there. So, you're talking $50,000, $60,000 minimum. By the time you equip them out, a lot more than that.
Well, there'd be more than that, sir. Because
Yeah.
of the salary, benefits.
I'm just talking about the vehicle.
Yeah, the vehicle itself.
Just the
okay.
vehicle itself.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
So
I guess
if we don't even have to provide a vehicle, I mean, that's a lot of savings right there for each person. So, that was the reason I brought up any kind of cost savings. I was in my head trying to think of, well, how could the school do this? You mentioned the money, and money is, let's be real, even though money is not what I'm focused on, things still have to be paid for.
Sure.
And so that's a consideration. And it's like, that's the reason I mentioned any money at all. Is like, well, if the school did it at this lower level, then maybe they don't buy the vehicles. Maybe they're able to not cut corners on personnel, but cut corners on a piece of equipment. And if they don't need a vehicle, they don't need a vehicle. And they can save that money right there.
Well, that's going to be for the school board to decide.
Exactly.
For that.
Exactly. That's their decision.
But to kind of finish this up, it just there's no way that either BISD or the school or the city, probably both, are going to get out of this without ponying up a lot of money. It's the cost of doing
Yes.
business of a city and the cost of doing business for our community. And so I think people misunderstand, particularly with the school board, that they have a bag of money somewhere that Jimerson just doles out. About 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, one of my sponsors that came on the show, and we were talking about just stuff, not just her business. But she also worked for a local school district up in the Mid-Cities area as a purchaser. And we were talking about the tremendous difficulties it was just to buy stuff, particularly if you have to find new vendors. Also, the fact is that the schools, I don't know what the city situation is, but I know the schools are very restricted in how they can raise tax revenues. If the city of Burleson raises tax revenue, they're under one law, but a school board, if they do it, let's say they raised the tax 13 cents, 6 of that would go back to the state of Texas. There was an article yesterday in the Dallas Morning News, or Sunday actually, about the recapture. Not that I'm tearful about Austin, but they give over $800 million back to the state. Plano, my home district back in the day, gives over $120 million. So they don't have the flexibility that maybe the city does in providing some of these things. That's another concern I would have, is just, okay, we go to this system. It's going to take a long time to put it together just because of the rules, regulations, and the red tape. And whereas we already have this in place here, we have the vendors, we have the staff, we have the structure, we have the oversight and the authority and administration. We don't have to create anything in the city, where we have to do that for the schools. So that's another issue I'd be considering.
But at the end of the day, we have to understand that these are BISD schools, and the decision is ultimately theirs, not ours.
If they decide they want Burleson police,
Yeah.
what would happen then?
Then then they would make a request, and we would do the best we could. Now, I would not be comfortable pulling 13 officers off the street plus 2 supervisors to ensure that we're gonna have staffing at the schools. But at the same time, how do I not feel comfortable in the schools? Puts us in a bit of a quandary.
Yes, that's why this isn't going to be solved today, certainly, or anytime soon. This is a long-term problem and solution. And if people expect us to, their kids to go back to school in a couple of weeks and it's all going to be taken care of, they're going to be disappointed because it just doesn't work that fast and for so many reasons. But anyway, I appreciate our comments on that. Can we talk about a different thing that came up a lot?
Sure.
The last election was contentious, and we can, accuse whom we want. It doesn't really matter. It's, but it does. We could say this group or this person made it contentious, blah, blah, blah. What does it matter now? But it was. Do you feel like in your elected position, you are working to try to ease some of those high levels of tension that occurred because of that election?
I think what we have to do is, and it wasn't just our election. We saw it at the national level. We see it at a lot of levels. Mm-hmm. We have to, as a community, understand that when we're sitting there griping that, I wish I had better candidates to choose from. Well, guess what? It's our fault. Mm-hmm. It's our fault we don't have those great candidates because we sit there and we commit character assassinations, we attack people and all this other stuff on Facebook and everything else. We've got a lot of wonderful people that would probably run and would love to run, but they're not about to put themselves or their family through that.
Well, I hear this on this end too. The people want to serve in elected or appointed positions, but they don't want to deal with the Facebook stuff. And to be frank, they don't want to go through the grill. Sometimes they have to go through the city council meetings.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's not just city council. It's at a lot of levels. Mm-hmm. We need to start, and I can't control Facebook. If somebody out there could figure out how to make everybody play nice on Facebook, they're a lot smarter than me, and they got my vote for whatever position they want to run for.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you consider yourself a person of influence with your people that supported you?
I do, but then just like you are as well.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
Do you see yourself ever getting on to another platform or on the Facebook and say, hey, guys, lower the temperature a bit? Have you done that kind of thing?
I did. I even did it during my campaign. Mm-hmm. You can go back and watch the videos. I did it during my campaign, asking people, hey, let's chill this out. Let's stop. Let's stop attacking each other. I wish people would focus instead on their own person they support. Don't tell me what's wrong with the next guy. Mm-hmm. Tell me what's right with yours.
Well, there are websites that seem to be dominated by that kind of conversation. And I just wondered, these are probably people that support you more than others. Have you gone on those websites or those Facebook pages that said, this is inappropriate, don't target individuals, don't target individual businesses? We don't want this, we don't want to turn this into a, divided city. Please be more respectful in your postings. I know you don't control what they say, but I think you have an ability to rebut them, and coming from you would make a lot of difference.
I do share that. I wish it would also be shared from the other side as well. Mm-hmm. I wish the other side would stop the constant character assassinations and attacks. I wish we could actually have meaningful conversations. I would love for us to sit down and, like you've done, mm-hmm. Share your views, opinions. How do you see things? Because at the end of the day, you may share something I hadn't thought of.
But that's one reason why I turned off the comments, because I didn't want this to be sidelined with distractions. As far as this side of the argument, if you will, about what's been put on Facebook, I don't participate in those Facebook pages. The ones that I do are monitored pretty closely, and they will delete or shut it down if they get too nasty. And it has happened. There's no question. But I just think they're monitored such that, that like Municipal Matters, I know is monitored. And there have been many times where Sarah has taken those comments off because it was distractive, hateful, destructive.
But yet some of those comments have stayed because I've been attacked by people on that page.
And I have to stand.
And I'm not bashing her page.
Okay.
This is her page. Mm-hmm. This is something else to keep in mind too. People have their own pages. You have your own show. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't tell you how to run your show. No more than I can tell somebody how to run their Facebook page.
Well, I'm just saying that Sarah has gone to extraordinary lengths to try to keep it civil, and sometimes some slip through the net, and you know what I'm saying. And so, because she does have a real life, yes. And I'm not saying that you're responsible for every Facebook shot at somebody that, out there. I'm not even going to name names because I don't know them. But, I don't want to hold you responsible for that. I guess what we would like to know is that you're able to tell some people who step over that line to cool it, to make it so that serving this city is not some form of combat almost. And that's what a lot of people feel. It's like, I want to serve. I want to be part of this commission or this particular committee or something like that. But I don't want to go through the comments, and I don't want my family dragged into this.
Exactly.
And that's happened with Sarah. There's been times that
it's happened with me.
Well, I'm sure it has, and it's happened with me too. But for me, it's a cost of doing business. I mean, I set myself up for this. So when I get criticized by people on Facebook or on other platforms, well, I asked for it, and whether it's fair or not is immaterial.
See, I would almost argue against that. My grandmother always used to say, "If you ain't got something nice to say about somebody, don't say nothing at all."
Right.
If we would just adopt that, I mean, if people don't like what you have to say, then fine, don't tune in.
Well,
why attack you?
Well, that's a good question that you'd have to ask them. But as far as yourself as an elected official, sometimes you're going to be, some of the criticism you get may not be fair, but it is, as an elected official, it's kind of like you assume that's part of the job. Just like I assumed that when I did this public podcast business, that not everybody's going to agree with me, and some people are going to think I'm a jerk. And that's been told to me more than once. But I can live with that because I asked for it. And just like you raised your hand and says, I will run for office, how do you deal with people that don't agree with you? And when they criticize you personally, not so much like you're a bad man, but your ideas are bad. Because I don't really think that's productive to make it personal. It's not productive at all. But there are going to be people that disagree with you pretty strenuously.
Of course.
And how do you deal with that?
So for me, I'm proud of learning. I believe that each and every one of us should be trying to learn something new each and every day. Now, here's the thing. In order to learn, you have to have an open mind. You have to have an open mind. You have to be willing to listen to people that have differing views and opinions, because you're not learning anything if you stay closed-minded and you listen only to yourself. You've learned nothing. So you have to have that.
Well, this one question I got, it was emailed to me. Please explain what the councilman can do personally to promote unity, minimize divisiveness, and better communicate with the entire community. And I thought that was the best phrased of questions, several of them that came along that same topic. So that's why I read this one in particular. What have you done, or what can you do to help minimize some of the, the tensions that go on in public service and whatever else?
Well, I'd love to give you a political answer, but I don't consider myself much of a politician. A lot of that's going to have to be from the individual. So if the individual has a very hardened heart and they have a lot of hatred in their heart, I don't know how I can fix them. Well, I really don't. But if it's somebody that wants positive change in our community, then reach out to me. Reach out to me. I'd love to have the conversation. I'd love to talk. One of three things is going to happen if you reach out to me. One, you're going to find out that, okay, this was actually miscommunication. It wasn't the way it seemed. Two, that you bring a great idea, but unfortunately because of laws or because of something else, we're not going to be able to go that road. Or three, you brought a great idea I never thought of. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll definitely look at it from that point of view.
Well, how I react when I get some, something on the Facebook page or whatever that's less than complimentary, if they're asking a real question, I'll try to respond. If they're just going to be, taking a shot, I say, thanks for listening and move on. But I'm not an elected official. And I guess my point is that this is really some of the criticisms that you get may be fair or unfair, but it is what an elected official goes through. And sometimes people in this community feel like they're taking a big risk in criticizing certain members of the city council. Is that an unfair accusation?
I can't speak for other city council members. I can speak for Jimmy Stanford. And what I'll say is it's unfair if you're talking about me, because I will never attack you back. I mean, you won't find anybody that can say I've attacked them.
Well, to be frank, I'm not talking about Mr. Johnson or Ms. Johnson or Mr. Green or the mayor or Mr. McClendon. Okay? So I'm saying that there's been a lot said that sometimes you and Ms. Payne make it kind of uncomfortable in these city council meetings. Is that true or not?
So if you're coming to city council and you're asking for resources or money, I'm going to ask those three questions that I mentioned earlier that I ask every time. Is it legal, ethical, is this what being proposed? Is this going to fulfill the needs? Or 3, is this actually something that is the best allocation of resources? If those are all answered coming in, then great. I don't need to ask a question at all. I sit back and I be quiet and I vote. But if not, I owe it to the voters. I owe it to the citizens, the ones that have put me in office or the ones that didn't put me in office. I owe it to everybody collectively, whether you voted for me or not, to answer these questions to make sure that I'm doing the best job I can for the city of Burleson.
Well, that kind of leads into the next question a little bit, but I'm going to ask this instead. There was an event or an episode that upset a lot of us, including myself, when Miss Tiffany Griffin was not treated, we thought, with very much decorum by the city council. But again, it mostly is Miss Payne that really caused a lot of angry feelings about how Miss Griffin and Miss Mathis were treated. That's the impression a lot of people are getting. If they're going to come to the city council, they better be ready for combat, because at least, you say it's not yourself, but at least Miss Payne is going to bring a lot of...
And I'm not here to discuss Miss Payne. I would respectfully request that you bring that up with her. I know you mentioned you would have her on her show, so...
No, Mr. Stanford, I'll never have her on my show.
Okay, I misunderstood a previous podcast. No, I apologize.
It's fine, but the reasons why don't concern us here.
Okay.
But it's not going to happen.
But if you're asking me about what happened with Miss Griffin, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
I've already told you the 3 things I have concerns with. Now, if you knew you were coming up for a council agenda item, and it was coming up, and you got a call from the city manager, he says, "Hey, you know what? I just sat down with Councilman Stanford, and he had some concerns with what you're proposing. He wanted to make sure you knew what his concerns were going in, so that way you could be prepared, so you could better answer those when you get there." Would that be an issue for you? Because that's what happened with the local law.
Well, I disagree, sir. I saw it, and Tiffany Griffin is a very prepared young woman. She runs a very efficient business, and it really wasn't the questions. Okay, it wasn't the questions. It was the demeanor. That you asking questions of whatever you ask is not the problem, because that is not just the prerogative, but the duty of a city council. My whole contention about the SROs wasn't you shouldn't be asking these questions. No, absolutely you should. That's what you're elected to do. But Miss Griffin is a prepared person, and it was the demeanor and the insinuation that people took away from watching that clip. And I'm not getting this third hand. I'm watching it myself and seeing the discomfort from her and Miss Mathis over these issues. That's what people see. Now, if your intention's different, say so right now.
Well, that's my point, is that I sat down with the city manager ahead of time, and I said, look, I said, these are coming up. I reviewed it. There's stuff that's contained as far as how we're supposed to apply the hot mop money. I'm not comfortable with what's being proposed. Would you mind reaching out to Tiffany Griffin and let her know that I'm going to ask these questions? And he said, sure, I will. And then even before council, I said, did you reach out to her? He said, yep. I said, great. And so I asked the questions that I had pre-prepared and that I believed was given to her. So, if she was surprised, then
no, she wasn't surprised, sir. That's not that the questions she had answered. It was the emotion, the demeanor of what was going on, the intensity of it. She knew the answers. Tiffany runs a great business.
Yeah, and
she knew what to expect as far as the questions, and she had the answers prepared. She had the data and everything you would want. It was the demeanor of the situation, the tenor of the whole thing seemed to be very almost antagonistic. And then when we talked about the
that wasn't my intention. If that came from me, then that wasn't my intention. My intention was to address these 3 issues.
Okay.
And I really don't care who's up there, who's coming to ask for money, who's coming to ask for resources, who wants to contribute to our city. I don't look at people that way. I look at what is it. These 3 questions that I ask of myself long before I joined council. I did this in business too, every step of the way. Any major decision, I asked these 3 questions.
Right. And when I was doing my shows a couple of weeks ago about the SROs, I took pains to say that what you were asking is within the lines of a duty of a city councilman. And that's what whether we like the questions or not, that's what city councils do. I personally thought maybe this was a time in which the people weren't prepared to answer you properly, plus the fact I didn't like the direction it was going, because on a policy level, I didn't like it at all. And we've discussed that plenty, and I appreciate your response on it. But
and I do hear what you're saying. And make sure I understood correctly. What you said is you'd rather have me said, you know what, on a future council agenda, which is what we came to at the tail end.
All right.
But what you're saying is that in the front end, maybe just go ahead and sit down and say, hey, you know what, Chief, I've got some questions about the elementary school stuff, and possibly maybe looking at the, maybe the school district handling security, or what do we do at the security level? So can we revisit in the future? That's what you would like to have seen.
Yes.
And I understand that. I respect that.
Well,
and that sounds like a valid point.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. That would give the people 2 weeks. If they're really this interested, they could come and have that open mic session and ask their questions. I'm sure that open mic session is always entertaining. Sometimes I think people get too excited, but that's democracy, free speech, whatever. But the point is that first I appreciate you saying that, but I think this is something that's going to take several council meetings to resolve. But back to what we were talking about, you said that you know people that want to serve. I know people that want to serve. What can we do to create a situation where people can serve this community in elected or appointed capacities without worrying about being dragged in Facebook or anywhere else? What can we do about that?
That's where not me and you,
well,
but the citizens of Burleson have to, and this is a national thing. I'm not bashing the citizens of Burleson. This is at a national level. We see this hatred at every level. We have to stop that. If we want good quality people in office, we've got to quit beating up everybody. What we need to do, instead of posting anything negative, we can find out that lo and behold, so-and-so grass clippings were in the street 3 years ago. I got a picture of it. Leave that alone.
Right.
Tell us about the person that you support, why I should support that person. Sell me on them. Stop the negative stuff.
Right. Let's end on a more positive note. You said there's some good things going on in Burleson. What have you been noticing that some of the good things going on?
Well, you mentioned earlier about is the council working together? I think we are, because you look at some of the stuff that's been talked about for years that we've been able to actually put in place. We've been able to put in place, the splash pad has gotten done, and that's, and not only has it gotten done, but we've actually opened that up to the citizens to be able to provide instant feedback, and there's been changes. Wonderful process. Right. We got Shannon Creek, a nice big park that'll be coming in play soon. Our first park that's actually designed by the citizens from the ground up. They were weighed in on everything. We've got Alley Cats coming in.
Yeah, a lot of people are excited about that. And there's schools, I know, are excited because I was somewhere to do their after prom celebrations, maybe.
Exactly.
How is the financial condition of the city, in your opinion?
Hopefully good. I have a lot of respect for Martin. He's done a great job. We put the bond package out, a very bare bones bond, allowed the citizens to sit down and vote and decide, okay, how's our money going to be spent? And they came back. We had a really interesting. One of the things on the bond yesterday was brought up, and it turns out TxDOT's going to fund the full bill, and all we got to do is pay a little bit of easement. It's like, oh, cool. Now we got some money coming back.
Well, that's helpful.
Yes.
How would you characterize your working relationships with the rest of the council?
I think it's going great. Now, obviously, we're not in lockstep, nor should we be, and nor do you ever want a group to always be in lockstep. We all come from different backgrounds, have different views, different opinions, but we all want ultimately the same thing, which is the betterment of the city.
Well, I don't know what goes on in the executive council, and I don't even want to attempt to speculate because I'm sure there's much more candid conversation in those. But there have been a couple of times it seems like there's been some tension on the city council meetings. Is that just a temporary thing?
I think that's temporary. I think with any people, if they're more passionate or less passionate, if they're more passionate about a particular topic, they may be more vocal. They may share more passion in that particular subject. But we work through it, and then we get past it, and we move on to the next item. There's far too many things to worry about the past.
Well, as you know, I have a tremendous amount of regard for Ronnie Johnson. I've known him for 30 years. Same with Victoria. She's a former student, and she showed me then the kind of young woman she is now and how sharp she is. And so, and I've gotten to know the mayor, and I think I can call him a friend now. So off the dais, so to speak, things are okay, more or less.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
We attend a lot of different functions together, and
okay.
it's a great working relationship.
So you don't go in the back and, start hollering and beating each other up, nothing like that. Well, that's good to know as a citizen.
Not that I'm aware of.
So it isn't anything like Congress, is it?
No, thank goodness.
Well, we're coming close on time, and I just have a brief comment, and then I always let the guests have the last word and still give them the platform. But my hope is that this conversation was productive for those who listen to it, and hope they listen and with attention to it. Your comments I respect. I didn't always agree 100%, but it didn't matter. I'm glad you were here to illuminate some of these things that maybe some people may not have understood. And I do hope in future days the temperatures turn down over all this business, because it's unpleasant. And we want to get back to a situation where we have an abundance of people that want to run or serve, as opposed to let's try to draft somebody. So let's hope in your position and in my position, we're in a position to do some of that. Anyway, you have the last word, sir.
Well, the last word I have is if you have anything that you want to share, anything that you're concerned about, reach out to me. Shoot me an email. I respond. I really do. And like I said, it's going to be one of 3 responses you're going to get. You're going to get that, okay, you know what, that's a miscommunication. Or you're going to get that, okay, this is it's a great idea, but unfortunately, the law didn't allow us to go there. Or number 3, it's like, wow, what a great idea. I'm glad you brought that up. I hadn't thought of that. And so please just reach out to us. And as far as, we've got elections coming up. We really do, and they're important.
Yes, they are.
And they're always important.
Well,
no matter when. We, there's a tagline for Burleson, be kind. Let's be kind. Let's treat each other with kindness. Let's ask ourselves, before I post that, before I say that, if that was my mother, would I really post or say that about my own mom? And let's try and be nice to each other.
No, I like my mother still. I'm fortunate she's still with us.
See, that's my point. Yeah. Ask yourself, is that something I'd really post like that? Let's not do that. Let's post, in this upcoming election and stuff, let's not post the negative and hatred about the other candidate. Sell me on why I should support yours.
I hope you feel like you've had a good opportunity here on this platform, on this podcast, and we were treated appropriately. And so, you think so?
I think so. Was I able to answer your questions? I mean, we don't always have to agree on everything.
No, sir. You didn't. You answered all the questions. I'll just put it that way. You answered the questions. You didn't duck or avoid any of them. And so I'm very satisfied with this conversation we've had. I hope what you come to wish for, and we both wish for, comes to pass. That the temperature comes down, we get back to more of a unified thing, and that'll be very, very helpful. I was going to say one more thing, but I forgot. But it doesn't really matter. So, I was going to ask you. You can tell me no, or I don't know, or go away. Are you going to run again when it's your turn?
I haven't made that decision yet. I try and live my life for the Lord, and I try and do whatever He has me do. So, when that time comes, I'll pray on it, and if I feel led to run again, then I will run. Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Stanford. I think this is a very productive conversation. I bet we could do this again sometime in the near future. And if you have comments, guys, out there, you don't know where to send them. And I hope y'all learned a little bit about the community today. So thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.